What's up, Uncoverers, and welcome to the fourth and final instalment of this Uncovering Britain series, where we've been uncovering Fawley Power Station. We're going to look at the last of the 4 leaked documents. I can say I've looked forward and I'm very excited. We're going to see some resolution. On my screen here is just this morphing test that I had done. Me personally, I fed it a data set of factories. It's interesting how it goes from a smaller scale, as we can see here, and it slowly kind of morphs into a much more cellular scale. Interestingly, quite similar to the blobs, so there might be some sort of connection as to why those blobs are shaped as they are, as artificial intelligence interpretation of an efficient factory space. So jumping into the last of the leaked documents here, we're met with a summary basically of Fawley Proving Grounds. And it's interesting to see one of the main things that they've highlighted here is a dominant input, whether it's symbiotic, human or AI. And as we discussed, the AI hangar here with the kind of blobs in the factory, that's an AI centric. But then as we look at the likes of the Public Education Centre, it's much more symbiotic, with AI and humans and design with them at the centre of it. We can see here that it's confirmed that this SRS, the item that we had looked at earlier, has been developed as a saleable unit available to various landowners. The AI hangar is, as we'd posited, responsible for producing autonomous agents, Asimov and Aki, those 2 agents that we had seen that were responsible for the bioremediation process. And then that's followed up by a project timeline here. So we can see when I went to observe back in 2018, the Marvins had just been deployed, finished. So that was the Marvins that I had seen behind the site. That's confirmation of that there. And then as we look to kind of early January, so this is when the Asimov and Aki, the 2 agents, were developed and kind of evolved from their Marvin that we had seen. And then as we see moving into May, this is when the Fawley Proving Grounds is planning to be open to the public. So this is when the Public Education Centre will be available for entry. Interestingly, they plan on seeing the AI hangar evolve and morph beyond what it is, so perhaps it will produce things other than the agents in the future. So we can see here a large-scale overview of Fawley Proving Grounds. It seems to be doing a good job as acting as a monument to that previous chimney. Yeah, the thing that strikes me mainly is the scale, the planned scale for this thing. We can see, if I zoom in, we can see down here the likes of kind of the scale of cars in comparison to the grandiose almost scale of this proving grounds. So as we move through the document here, we have what's been described as a taxonomy. On the left here, we can see AI-centric at the top, down through to human-centric, and then across 2 pages, we have a series of 6 spaces. The first space is the chimney, so obviously this is the most AI-centric. It was the kind of static agent that we had seen earlier on, requiring no human intervention. You can see as to why it would be the most AI-centric element of the master plan, slowly metabolizing the contaminated air on site. You see a degree of anthropocentricity, so evidently that's the degree that the human's been put at the centre of this part of Fawley Proving. So we can see a value of 1 for the chimney being the lowest, so it obviously has the lowest degree of anthropocentricities and subsequently the lowest amount of human input. So then with a degree of anthropocentricity of 2, only slightly above that of the chimney, the AI hangar here containing the various blobs that we had seen generated earlier on is the next most AI-centric element within the Fawley Proving Grounds. We can see on the right here they're using it as a test bed for AI-centric processes monitored and tracked by the UK OAI, so it serves as the main testing bed for the UK Office for Artificial Intelligence. And then following the AI hangar with a slightly higher degree of anthropocentricity of 4 is the synthetic remediation system, the kind of saleable unit that we had discussed earlier, responsible for effectively converting the contaminated crude oil within the ground into saleable or raw materials for use. You see down the right here it says permitting a rent and SRS business model. So as we had hypothesized earlier on, perhaps it is available for rent, because presumably once the land has been bioremediated, wouldn't have a need for further remediation. Unless, similar to Fawley Power Station, there was a continued contamination source, as there is from the petrochemical site. So now as we move here into slightly more symbiotic elements of the Fawley Proving Grounds, we can see here the plug with a degree of anthropocentricity of 5. This is the part of the master plan where goods are dropped off, picked up. So yeah, we can see here on the right it says utilizes a combination of AI-driven processes and human-controlled processes. So that explains the kind of symbiosis and that slightly higher degree of anthropocentricity that we were describing earlier. And then just further down here we had the Public Education Centre. Being a public-focused element within the Fawley Proving Grounds, it would be inevitable that this would have a higher degree of anthropocentricity, as it does of 7. Interestingly, we can see on the right here a description of 3 main spaces. So there's an exhibition hall, which is materialising the findings within that manifesto that we had seen earlier. There's an observatory to observe these blobs, and then there's a viewing platform, which is a kind of view out onto this area here, which is I think it was described as the playground in which these agents undertake the process of bioremediation. As we can see, there's kind of mud piles there and the markers left. And then the final and most anthropocentric space within the proving grounds is the fiscal sector, with a degree of anthropocentricity of 9. It's described here as the fiscal sector provides a medium between potential buyers and UK OAI saleable items. So that would explain as to why this has the highest degree of anthropocentricity. Its focus is almost entirely around the human and providing a medium for the human to view these saleable items. We can see here it's kind of wrapping around the SRS, so presumably there is some sort of observation element. We can see here as it's wrapped around the SRS here, and on the right it says includes a purpose-built viewing deck, so presumably that's what that would be, wrapped around these, the first saleable item from the UK OAI. And then following here we have the overall plan and then the plans of each individual blobs. In the bottom left here there's a scale. So if we zoom into the bottom left here we can see scale, so we can see this scale here. So what I've done is I've taken it into Photoshop just to try and get an idea of the actual scale here. This is 75 meters as 0 to 75, and we can see so it's over 75 meters. And then I've stacked them up, so 5 times 75 is 375, so you get an idea that it's over 375 meters long and over 75 meters deep, which is, you get a sense of the actual scale of this thing. As we look through these spaces we see a lot of familiar spaces, so the AI hangar here, the plug, chimney here, the fiscal sector here, and then the public education centre tucked up against the AI hangar there. What we can see here is the blobs, so the engine room there with the assembly hall there. This looks to be their synthetic nursery, so we can see they're training some form of agents there. These connections here seem to be from the plug, so these are probably the waste inputs and outputs from the plug into the blobs. And then just down here we can see the public education centre here with the kind of observation deck presumably in the viewing decks, and then the fiscal sector here wrapping around the synthetic remediation centre. And then this isometric drawing here gives an overview of Fawley Proving Grounds. We can see the plug here in the foreground with the AI hangar suspending the blobs, and then in the background here the fiscal sector with the SRS and then the large chimney standing above it all. Interestingly, it makes clear here we can see that kind of playground area where the agents are undertaking the remediation process. And then on these elevations we get a sense of how large this chimney actually is, and again how large the hangar is in comparison to the rest of the scheme. I was thinking before, and the old chimney within Fawley Power Station was 198 metres tall, so judging by this I can only assume that they've mimicked that. It's also interesting to see the existing basement and Fawley foundations and the kind of infrastructure going in, presumably gas or fuel of some form. And on this northwest elevation again we get a sense of how the AI hangar and the chimney are kind of towering over the rest of the site. And interestingly here we get a clearer view of the markers left behind by Asimov once he's excavated. Yeah, it's really curious just to see the kind of sense of scale. Oh, we just had a donation. Thanks Wingman X for the 10. Thank you a lot for that, man. He says, wow, look at the AI hangar. It's huge. Yeah, I mean that's a pretty straightforward explanation, but yeah, I mean it is. I think there was a scale bar here. We might have to quickly see how large it actually is. Just doing some very rudimentary kind of finger scaling on the screen. This seems to be about 50 meters tall. And I'd heard the term cognitive assemblage used when you have a series of cognitive systems that are working together. Fawley Proving Ground seems to me like a large cognitive assemblage. And you have a variety of different AI systems, whether it's the blobs themselves or kind of the autonomous systems within the blobs. This drone eye view that we're seeing here, there's a series of different AI systems that are all connected within this kind of cognitive assemblage. They all seem to have forms of cognition. So interestingly, this next image here gives us a better idea of how the blobs actually work. At the bottom here we have a kind of external substructure which looks similar to kind of a moon landing thing connected through the underside, which roots up and supports the entire plastic structure. And then you can see in some of the images previous there was some sort of kind of ribbing, so presumably that's a connected skeleton kind of structure. And then on the top here we can see a wire and then kind of several layers of the skin. So again, that seems to confirm, as we suspected, that this is some form of transformable space and the skin can adapt and evolve depending on its kind of interior required functions. And then this was an interesting one. This was those master plan interpretations that we had seen laid over the actual proposed master plan from the UK OAI. The interesting image to see these AI interpretations transformed into a physical manifestation of that space. And then these images begin to posit what the final master plan will look like in operation. Some of them I'm unsure whether they're images or proposals, but I'll go through them one by one. So the first one here is sunset operation. The caption reads, whilst the human-centric spaces begin their shutdown sequences, the AI-centric systems continue through the night. The synthetic remediation system slowly continues to metabolize the ground contaminant, whilst the blobs continue to create and train autonomous agents, evolving and learning as they do. So yeah, it's really interesting to see these kind of glows from these systems that are operating through the night, the blobs over there and then the SRS system here. The next image becomes quite otherworldly. It's called Foundry Downtime. The caption reads, despite the autonomous nature of the foundry facilitating a 24/7 schedule, there inevitably must be time left for maintenance and checks. Due to the efficiency of the various AI systems and their ability to self-repair, maintenance is only required once a month for a brief downtime of 6 hours. If one is lucky to observe this phenomenon, you'll witness the rare sight of humans moving within the AI-dominated space. So it's interesting to see that there is some sort of kind of human intervention still within this otherworldly space. And then this next image here was titled Autonomous Production. And the caption reads, whilst production is fully engaged and the assembly line is functioning as predicted, currently producing agents, a UK OAI specialist may be met with the daunting task of descending into the centre of the assembly hall in the event of necessary repairs. As an AI-centric space, it offers little in terms of human comfortability and safety, with countless risks to human life, including the toxins, facilitating the requirement for a hazmat suit. So this one's really curious, because this is evidently one of the most kind of AI-centric spaces, but in the event that there is a requirement for human intervention, one has to seemingly make this risky descent. This picture here is titled Maintaining Blobs. I think it's one of my personal favourites. I enjoy kind of seeing the blobs. So the caption for this one reads, although these AI embodied spaces, affectionately referred to as the blobs, generally avoid incidents, or in the case of an incident have the ability to self-repair/adjust, there are occasions in which human intervention is required. Whether this be a ruptured skin or a malfunctioning motherboard, the team behind the scenes of Fawley PG keep things ticking over. So it's interesting, as the blobs are already on site, they're seemingly already understanding that there will have to be some form of maintenance schedule, an entire team on site ready to perform repairs where necessary. So this rather colourful image here is titled Plugged In, and it's an internal from within the plug. The section of Fawley is responsible for kind of goods drop off and pick up. The slightly shorter caption reads, some spaces can't afford to cease operation, one of which is the plug. HGV's approach to drop off pick up goods 24 hours 7 days a week. I think the thing that strikes me most is in comparison to the interiors of the blobs, we can see here that this is obviously a much more anthropocentric space, despite still having some form of AI input. I think it's fair to assume a human wouldn't lay out a kind of cargo transfer station in a way similar to this. So the last image here is titled Observing Blobs, and it describes the view from within the Public Education Centre, looking into the hangar and observing these blobs metabolising and producing these agents. The caption reads, a predominant function of the Public Education Centre is to bridge the gap between AI and the general population. Observing the blobs, AI-generated spatial interpretations of previous fragments of Fawley, is an effective way of doing so, providing the public with a one-on-one encounter with AI systems. Its predominant function is evidently to bridge the gap between the public and AI and their understanding of AI. I'm personally really excited for it to open. I can't wait to go and see these things in person. I feel like it's going to be a Jurassic Park-esque experience. And then interestingly, again with this image, there was a Artivive Ready kind of notification at the bottom left here. I've downloaded that video and I'll just bring that up now. So we can see here that video was a internal view of kind of giving an idea of what the space will feel like to be within. You get a sense of scale of this observation deck and its proximity to these blobs and the AI hangar. We can see a little agent in the back there, which is really exciting. Right guys, thank you for joining me for these series of live streams covering Fawley Proving Ground. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I personally cannot wait until summer 2023 to get the opportunity to go and visit this space. I hope I'll see some of you there, uncoverers. I'll probably set up some form of event, so maybe we can organise for a group of us to go together, which would be a lot of fun. Get to see you guys in person. Don't forget to like, subscribe. Thank you, uncoverers. Keep uncovering.